Hello, and welcome to a conversation with noted educator, fishery biologist, and conservationist Terry Harmon. Terry is a legend amongst fishing enthusiasts, conservationists, and educators in our region for his pioneering work at University School fish propagation and the conservation of native brook trout, projects that drew the attention of and support of the Cleveland Museum of Natural History Trout Club. The Trout Club itself was founded in 1978 with a mission to promote cold water fisheries and habitats, conservation, and stream ecology. The Trout Club also sponsors classes, activities, and events related to fly fishing and outings to a variety of prime angling locations throughout the year. Today, we want Terry to tell his unique story of a life with trout.
Thank you. At the start, I want to thank the Trout Club of the museum and the museum itself for hosting what I hope will be a presentation that impresses people about what we can do about preserving our vanishing wildlife in terms of fish in this case. You wanted to talk about the native trout.
Right. So, I mean, there's a great story here about
yes,
a
it
native
is.
strain
It's
of
a
brook
serendipity
trout.
story.
So let's hear about that.
I was just finishing up a class in the biology class at the school. It was around 78, maybe it says there, Scott Schubert shows up. Yeah.
1984.
1984. I have trouble with the 70s and the 80s. Anyway, I knew from, like you did, that Kirtland and Garlick and Ackley, actually Ackley had a fish farm, the first fish farm in North America.
Really?
You know that? There's a plaque at 155th and Ackley. So there was a well-known that at least in the history we had trout, and I knew from my father, Furnace Run and Conneaut. So I was happy with this Quebec trip, bringing us eggs, and then we could do work with them. So all of a sudden I'm at this class, and so in those days we didn't have a computer, it was just starting. Somebody came to the door and said, there's a guy on a motorcycle down on the loading dock area, wants to talk to you. Oh, I don't know, a motorcycle. So I went down, and there was a stranger, young guy, nice guy, introduced himself as Scott Schubert. I'm from Chardon area. And, oh, good. He said, I understand you work with trout. I said, I do. And he said, well, I do too. I have a pond in my backyard, and I have trout. They're kind of pets. I went to the Chagrin Pet and Garden store, which is a feed store as well as a hardware store, and wanted to buy some trout feed. The man there said that they only can sell in 40-pound bags, 50-pound bags. I can't get that on my bike. Of course not. So he said, oh, there's a guy at University School that buys trout food from us named Harmon. If you go over there, maybe he could give you enough for your pets. So that's what it was. He came for some fish food. I said, oh, you have trout. I said, rainbow trout? Because, you know, that's what most people think of because that's what they're allowed to see. Oh, no, brook trout, native trout. And he used the word native. I said, this guy knows something. So come in. And we talked. He said, I don't know what the big brouhaha is. They're all over the place out where I live. What? I said, where do you live? He said, well, I'm off of Mulberry Road in Geauga County. And there's a stream there that's one of the branches of the Chagrin. I forget what it is. But in any case, it goes through this Sharon conglomerate again, which is that high spring yield. That sounds like it. So I said, I'll give you all the feed you want if you show me where you get them. Okay, come on. School was over. I followed him on the bike, went to his house, saw his pond. Indeed, he had these beautiful brook trout. So then we went down into the creek where he got the fish to start the pond. And they were all over the place. You know, all sizes. And most of them small. I was speechless. He said, well, this isn't the only stream. There's other streams too. Show me. So this led to this odyssey. And the big one was this one called Springbrook, which is the icon of the Division of Wildlife. But he took me there. It was tributary to Bass Lake in Chardon, as well as there were a couple other streams that were tributary that had them. And we saw them. And I said, who manages this land? You know, it was in a gorge. There were private homes, small cottages. So he said, oh yeah, this is owned by, I think it was American Fork and Hoe Company of Ashtabula, had bought this property, this huge property around these creeks, as a retirement community for their employees. So they were offering real estate for either summer homes or cottages and things. So he said, well, there's a land office here. There's a guy there. So I went and met him, and I just introduced myself and told him what I was interested in. Oh, go study this. Sure, come study the stream. Do whatever you want. Let me know what you find. That's what started it. And we had students that I put on this detail, one of whom works for the school in the alumni office. They went to this place called Woody Brook, and got a huge trout with a net. So much history has happened since then. Woody Brook was threatened by a development, and it was saved through the brokerage of a couple of people, one of which was Steve Madewell, right? You know, the Woody Brook thing. Before they had to mitigate the stream that had been compromised by pre-development, they were going to make ponds on it and everything. It was full of these little trout. So we had followed it all the way down to where it goes into the main. There was a big stream. Unfortunately, that one had come straight from the east off a golf course in Chardon. And that was the end of it, chemicals. And yet this little stream, which was still pristine, the lower part was total forest, watershed protected. It was a natural to aim for restoration or maintenance. So you may know there was a restoration project by a company out of Columbus that did stream remediation. I think his name was Steve Phillips. Came in there and rebuilt the damaged upper stream. And today they're in there. And the other stream is under protection of Division of Wild
Natural areas and preserves.
Natural areas. You can't go there like we did. Mm-hmm. We went there several times. Meanwhile, remember, at this time, Sulphur Springs we're running the Sulphur Springs Trout Project with the Clone Group 1.
With Clone Group from Quebec, your
Right.
Quebec stock, right?
So at this time, a student with his civic duty wrote the state. Unbeknownst to me, he wrote the Division of Wildlife, and his name was James Odeski. And loved the guy. He was just on fire with this, and he wanted to know other people that did things with this. He wrote this really urgent letter, that, hey, we found these fish that are in the historical literature, and they're hanging on by their toenails. Will you join with us to somehow expand this and save these fish? Wow, he showed me the letter. I said, okay, good, let's see what they say. Well, a letter came back, the first letter came back, and it complimented him and University School for their conservation concerns. But they, in researching their records, realized that in the 1880s and so forth, there was a lot of importation of salmon and trout around the country from places where they were native to where they were not native. And they said that these brook trout were no doubt from Michigan or Cortland, New York. Okay, that's what you think. So we had not had any discussion of what became known as genetic fingerprinting. So James, being the good Samaritan he is for this whole project, finds this guy through the literature who's up at Guelph, Ontario, who's probably the world expert on salmon and trout genetics. And he was doing a survey of all the different varieties of brook trout across the country. And James called him and he said, Ohio, I forgot Ohio. You might, yes, right, you're on Lake Erie. You must have, we have them in the Grand River of Ontario, which is off by Long Point on the North Shore. Yeah. They're in there. And they, we have them up to the headwaters, which then jumps into the Algonquin Park watersheds. So Dansman said, can you get some of these fish? So we get back to you. We went to Don Tincher at the land office at not the state of Ohio, and he said, sure, you could do that. So this letter that went to the state, they had found then that we had been working with brook trout, and they were very curious of under what authority were we working in the park, or Well, at that time, we assumed the authority was the park. They had autonomy over woods and waters. That was their management unit. Their position was, no, the state of Ohio is imperial on all waters, So that became kind of a red light about what might happen. Anyway.
Meaning they wanted you to cease and desist what you were doing with clone group number 1 and
right,
stocking.
and in fact, cease and desist with brook trout, period. Don't do anything with brook trout.
And were you doing about trying to propagate the native strain in your hatchery at this point?
Not
okay.
then.
Not then, okay.
But so the state went along with, we'll answer, subsequent communication led to them agreeing to net a sample from the creek and send them to Dansman, or we took them to Dansman. So I remember going over there with one of their biologists named Vince LeConte, who was a friendly guy, but he certainly didn't set policy for the Division of Wildlife. But he worked with us to catch these fish. It was nothing to take a seine in that creek and we took about 18 to 20 trout of different sizes, and they were gorgeous fish. Dansman told us how to do it. He said, just put ice in a big ice chest and throw them in whole, and then come up. It's only 5 hours. So you drive to Buffalo, you go up the Queens Highway up to Hamilton, and then it's just about an hour north of there. And he said, come up, you bring your students, we'll put them up for the weekend, they can check the college, we can stay in a dorm, he said, I want these fish, and we'll show you how we do genetic fingerprinting. So, wow, this is great. And we got a bus driver. I think we had 12 kids, 15 kids. Wanted to see this genetics lab. And up we go, and he is ecstatic. He's a very tall man, very gracious. Takes us right away into the lab, bring the fish in, and he said, we'll work on these right now. We'll get our first sample, and then tomorrow we'll show you the sequences. So we were hosted that night at the dorm. We had food. Next morning, breakfast, we come over, and just about the whole day we went through this lab, and different researchers were showing us different things. It was totally new to us, it was totally new to most people then. So Dansman's idea was, he was interested in, with a geologist, on how these trout could trace the post-glacial invasion of watersheds as they move north, as the ice retreats. So we left the fish with it, and he said, I'll call you. I won't write you. We'll call you as soon as we get a determination. So what is a determination? Well, they have unique alleles in their genetic makeup, and enough statistically significant enough different alleles that it could set them off as a separate either subspecies or population at least. So the call came to the school, where's James? I want to talk to James. You do have a fish, a unique fish. And it turns out he's not unique just to Ohio. He's unique to a corridor. And that's the whole interesting thing. He said the refuge was probably West Virginia. Down there, that clone group is in West Virginia. And then he said, what's the most logical pathway is likely, look at the map. We got the Ohio River and the Kanawha rivers. Those are big rivers. Picture them in post-glacial time. God, the water that must have been. Now you have the at Marietta. You have the what's the
Muskingum?
the Tuscarora is north of that. Goes into it.
Is that Muskingum?
Muskingum.
Yeah.
So then up Muskingum, up Tuscarora, and then when you get to the Akron Summit Lakes, begins the watersheds into the north to Lake Erie. So his premise is the most likely it'd be lake. The Chicago Valley was a lake at the high stage with the Maumee stage, right? And guess what comes in as a major stream from the east? Tinker's Creek. And Tinker's Creek starts comes out of Aurora Lake. And of course, in those days, who knows how big they were. And then Aurora Lake begins the south branch of the Chagrin River.
Wow.
So they're into the Chagrin, and then they're into Lake Erie, and then through one route, and then into the streams all through the Lake Erie Basin and up through. So, he does find them in several places. I think he said that they are in rivers north to the park, Algonquin.
Algonquin, okay. So this
And
is the same strains you then would find in southern Ontario.
Yeah.
North of
Right.
Lake Erie. Yeah.
And this dovetails with a most recent report on post-glacial refuges for these fish. He mentions that the Ohio fish is not unique to Ohio. It can't be. I mean, it got here from somewhere else.
Right.
So,
But it wasn't put here.
it wasn't put here.
Right,
It was put here by itself.
It confirmed that it was in fact a native
Right.
strain. Yeah.
So once that got established that this was a unique fish, the Division of Wildlife became very interested, and then prompted meetings that would steer the future of any management of this fish along their lines. And then came the Museum of Natural History's dinner meeting with.
So let's just talk about that, because this is now where the museum's Trout Club, and the Trout Club being composed of folks who are enthusiasts for cold water streams and fisheries and fellowship and all the rest of it, but they obviously were very interested in what you had been doing with brook trout, and I'm sure very interested in the Sulphur Springs thing, but now this is sort of a game changer where we now have a native fish, a threatened gene pool.
Exactly.
And so the museum's Trout Club was the convening agent to bring you together with the Division of Wildlife to start talking about the future of the.
And somewhere at this time, just preceding this meeting with the club, because the state, both of us knew these fish were native, we found a place that was a neutral, perfect place to raise these fish artificially at a private property in Wade Hill. It was on, it's called Spring Hollow. It was owned by, I forget, but now it's owned by a doctor, retired doctor from the clinic, and was I was introduced to the place through some students who knew about this pond that was spring fed. this estate is astonishing. It's on the east branch of the Chagrin River. It's on the escarpment of, it's on a big flat outwash plain. Mm-hmm. Tons of gravel at the base, and the estate had been built in the 1890s, and they had a spring house, a beautiful stone spring house, a quarter the size of this room, and lined with stone, and 3 sources of water coming in, plus springs coming out of the bank all along, falling into the East Branch. And on the end of the edge of the property, they built a small pond like we had at Madison, same thing. And they had formalized this as a water garden. Water came out of the spring house through a rock bordered channel into a pool that looked like a swimming pool. It had steps down into it, but it was ice water. I don't know who could swim in it. The outlet was a standpipe that then led to the pond. And the pond then, which was dammed by a concrete barrier, was badly eroding. Bad site. It was right on the precipice of this cliff leading to the East Branch. Water cascading down the cliff. So, you know what a water ram is? It used to be, it was a pump that if you have a pressure head of water source up here, mm-hmm. and it's just a little bit of water, and you feed this structure, it's a spherical structure. As it fills with water, it increases pressure. Right. And then that pressure from a pipe this big is reduced to a pipe the size of your finger, and that increase in pressure propagated in a smaller pool can pump water uphill. So it to a certain degree. And it's not a big flow, but it's a trickle. You can get water to a cistern up the hill. I mean, the farmers had used this for years where they have hilly country, called water ram. Anyway, there had been a water ram bound by next to the dam, and it was cracked. In other words, it long and rusted away. But the pipe leading to it came from up the spring, up the spring, that first pool. So the pressure head there, we had about a 12-foot pressure head, mm-hmm. and there was a valve on there. Well, we got the valve open. It was a gate valve. And it was seized up and everything. But we got it open, but couldn't shut it. So we got it. We were able to get another valve, replace it, and now we could we could get water to a spot, a little terrace area. We built a hatchery for the native brook trout.
So this is in what year? So the brook trout were discovered in '84. So what year are you now?
We're 80. About 87.
Okay, and the Division of Wildlife is supportive of your effort?
Right, that was why we did it. Now we had no argument. They didn't like the fact that we had a hatchery at our school where we had been working with Quebec trout. Right. And I said, there's no problem with separating them. We in our hatcheries, fish get mixed, and okay, so we pursued this, but it gave us another project. Now, this was 15 minutes from school. Now, this is another, again, we had time. We built a hatchery that used this water from the water ram pipe as a source, and it turned out beautiful. We had 2 tiers of hatchery troughs. A building, it was 14 by 8. It was right on the hillside. It looked like it had a sloped roof, and it was really nice. We worked hard. We put windows in it, and the pipe came in to the side of the building, and then it was dispersed through 2 gate valves for each trough, and the water then went out to the end of the trough, went down a drain to a common drain, and then out to the brook. So then that necessitated getting a broodstock. And the largest trout that were in those creeks are like that. So again, a division representative went with us. I think we came up with something like 80 small fish.
So the division representative is with you, but you guys have built the
Right.
hatchery. You guys are actually collecting the fish.
Right.
You're really putting the whole thing together.
Yeah, we financed the whole thing.
Got it.
But you know, we're trying to build this relationship now. Things are going okay. By 2 years later, and kids would go there and feed. Watercress lines the bank of the creek coming into this pond. You know, you could have a dinner of watercress. It was just a most beautiful place, and the hatchery worked great. The water was flowing, ready for eggs. We don't have eggs yet. So the pond, which probably had been built around the 1890s too, was so filled in with leaves. You go in there with waders, and I mean, you just sank in it. There was a deep area, maybe 7, 8 feet. It was such cold water, it didn't matter if it was deep. Trees shaded it, it was safe. The doctor had told us that in the past he had had rainbow trout in there, but poachers would come all the time. He said, I can't keep fish here. So what are we going to do? You know, we're not going to post a sentry on the place. So the word, he thought, because there were no more fish in there for several years, that the word would be among these poachers. It's not worth going there. So we put these 80-some brook trout in there, and 2 years later, they were big. They really grew. They exploded. It was like the word was, oh, they're genetically stuck at this side. No, they sprung out just like brook trout everywhere. Up in Labrador, they got big. We fed them. The water was perfect. So I guess in 88, this fall, you could tell they were nosing up into the watercress creek. You know when they're interested in spawning.
Spawning, yeah.
So we went in there with a seine, and oh my God, how are we going to do this? It's like yesterday with rocks, now it's with mud. It's a silt. Well, we got a ton of them up to the dam. And we're going along the side, another man on the other side, way over, and we get the net up there, perch it right next to the concrete wall, and the state was there, the state guy, and we were just overwhelmed by these beautiful fish. And we got a lot of eggs from them right away, right there at the dam, standing in water this deep, stripping fish. Kids are there. And then our first eggs, you'd imagine, go into the screens on this hatchery on the property. Oh, everybody's happy. And I got one last word. In all the years I've done this at US, although we had lots of kids in the program, it's always 1 or 2 in each of these groups that goes and stands out.